Hi there, it's Stephanie from Mommy Standard Time, where we save minutes and savor moments. Welcome to my channel and welcome to Vlogtober. So if you're new here, I am uploading a new video every day in the month of October. So just a little bit of background information about today's video. So hubby and I were watching a movie recently about, I don't know what, and the topic came up of requesting a meal from home, kind of like a last meal situation. And so he and I got to talking, like, what would you choose for your last meal? And I know it's a little morbid, but you know, it's spooky season after all. And so I thought, what would my last meal be? And it was really hard for me to decide, but I definitely have it narrowed down to a few. And I thought I would share one of those with you today. Today we are going to be making my mom's potato soup and oatmeal rolls. It's a carb-heavy meal, and it's a pretty basic meal. You know, some people would choose super fancy dinners with all the trimmings, and honestly, potato soup and rolls just feels like a hug, a big giant hug from my mom, and I think that's great. That would be a great last meal. So I'm gonna walk you through how I make potato soup. So just a quick disclaimer. I think cooking is kind of a funny thing because yes, there are professional chefs who are absolutely outstanding. You can have the most delicious food you've ever had in your life cooked by these chefs. But the thing with cooking is that we all have to eat. We all have to do it. So even if you're not trained, you're still expected to cook. And if you're a parent, you got to feed little people, right? So that's why I think cooking is so funny. And that's why I wanted to have a space on YouTube where I truly don't like to cook. I really don't. I don't enjoy it. So why do I share food on YouTube if I really don't like to cook? Because I feel like there's a lot of you out there that feel the same way. That you'd rather not cook, but you know you kind of have to, and you'd like to cook things that are delicious because at the end of the day, I love food and I want it to taste good. So I do like to share things that I think are easy, but also delicious. So today is one of those recipes. Yes, I'm sure you will see ways to make it taste better. You could put in the comments all the various ways that you could improve on my potato soup, but it's really good the way it is. Every time I make it for people, even though it is so simple, people always ask me, how did you make that? Can I have the recipe? Because it's simple, but it is delicious. So enough talking, let's get to the recipe. So I like to get started on the rolls about 5 hours before dinner time. And I know what you're thinking, well, that is not quick and easy, but they are very easy. You just have to babysit them a little bit. And for me, when it comes to baking, I only put the work into it if the product is absolutely delicious. And these rolls are so good. So it's worth the trouble, believe me. But you'll notice in that first large bowl, I had 2 cups of boiling water with 1 cup of rolled oats, and then I also stirred in 3 tablespoons of oil. You want to do that right off the bat because it needs time to cool off. And so while that's cooling off, in this other measuring cup, I have 1 envelope of yeast and then 1/3 cup of lukewarm water. And then I also add 2/3 cup of packed brown sugar and 2 teaspoons of salt. The yeast has already had time to soften before I add the sugar. And yes, I totally stir things with measuring spoons. Why dirty a spoon when you can just use the measuring spoon you've already pulled out? Now it's really important that you do not add this liquid to the oats until the oats have cooled to an appropriate temperature for yeast. Because remember, that water was boiling and you don't want that to kill your yeast. So mine had to sit for a while, but you'll notice a lot of the liquid has been soaked up by the oats. And now it's time to add the liquid to the oats. And then we're also going to add 5.5 cups of flour. I actually add 5 cups of flour, and then I hold the 1/2 cup aside for when I'm kneading, and then I add in as much as I need. See what I did there? So you'll notice on this particular day, I only needed about another quarter cup of flour. It started out pretty sticky. I should have floured my hands before I started, but I was in a bit of a rush, so I didn't do that. So now all I do is put plastic wrap over the bowl and then set it in a warmish place because this is a pretty dense dough and it does take a bit of time to rise. So what we're going to do is cover it until it rises about double, and then we're going to punch it down once and then let it rise to double again. And this is the process that takes a while. If you can keep the dough pretty warm, it takes about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on just the temperature and how active your yeast is. So this is how the dough looks after I have punched it down and let it rise a second time. And now it's time to get them formed into rolls. The dough could have just used a little bit more time, but I needed it to match up with when dinner was going to be served. So before I get started on the potato soup, I pull out my baking sheet with a silicone liner, and you can also just spray the pan. I don't know what I was thinking this day. I always make this recipe on one pan, but for some reason, maybe it was the little circles on the silicone liner, but I was like, yeah, 12, a dozen per pan. Normally I fit all 24 on one cookie sheet because they just cook fluffier and they're happier rolls when they can touch. Just keep that in mind as you're watching this, that I totally know that I should have just put them all on one pan. And that's what I would suggest that you do as well. So 6 rows of 4 rolls each. So here I am with my fancy Dollar Tree scraper, and I just cut the dough kind of like a pizza into 8 wedges. And yes, I know these are not very even, but we'll get it sorted out. Anyway, and then each of those wedges is going to be 3 rolls for a total of 24. Now, because I'm not a food blogger, I totally didn't get my camera set up very well for you to see how I make the rolls, but really you're not missing much. I just pick up a wedge and add a little flour if it's too sticky, and then I just pinch it so that I can kind of estimate 3 rolls of about the same size. And you can barely see, I'm just kind of tucking it on itself. I don't roll it because I try to handle the dough as little as possible. So I just kind of tuck the ugly ends up underneath so that the top looks smooth, and then I set it on the pan. Nothing fancy, and honestly, you're not missing much with my camera angles. And I'm honestly hoping that this just makes you feel better. They are not very even, they are not pretty, but once they have time to rise and they bake, they will be just great. So I just cover them and leave them alone until right before dinner. So now that the rolls are doing their thing, it's time to turn our attention to the main event and start peeling potatoes. So a quick tip from me to you, if you ever see an all mesh washcloth or dishcloth, grab it because it is so handy. You can just lay it in the bottom of the sink when you're peeling potatoes, and you can rinse and everything, and the water goes right through, but the potato peels don't go down your sink. And then when you're all done, you can just lift that cloth up and walk it over to your garbage can and shake the peels into the garbage. It's super handy. Take that tip for what it's worth, but I think it's a huge time saver. So for the soup, the vegetables that I use are potatoes, celery, and onion. And so I use 2 cups of potatoes, 1 cup of celery, and 1 cup of onions. And those are all finely chopped, especially the celery and the onion. And the potatoes I keep a little bit larger because they do cook a little bit faster than the celery. So if you don't like crunchy celery, try to have your potatoes a little bit bigger, and then you can always kind of stir them or mash them a little bit if they feel like they're too big after you've cooked them. Another option is you can saute the vegetables, like the celery and the onion, before you add them. This is how I've always made it. And then you just barely cover the vegetables with water, add a little bit of salt, cover, and cook on about medium heat for 20 to 25 minutes until the veggies are a tenderness that you like. So while that is simmering, you get started on your cream base for your soup. And you just melt 3/4 cup of butter and then add 3/4 cups of flour. And you get that whisked together and let it cook, for a couple of minutes. And once that's looking all bubbly and nice, it's time to add the cream. And so this recipe calls for half and half, but I never have half and half. In my house, I'm not a coffee drinker or anything. So I just do a mixture of milk and whipping cream, and you just do half and half. So 2 cups of milk and then a pint of heavy whipping cream. And then you just let this simmer and do its thing. You do want to babysit it because you don't want it to burn on the bottom. So you do want to whisk it pretty continuously until it thickens up. And so the consistency that you're going for, see, this is not quite there. You want it to be pretty thick because you are going to be adding this to your undrained vegetables. And so it will thin out once it's added to the vegetables. So again, still not quite there, but we're getting there. I'm starting to see the whisk marks being left in that the cream base. So we're getting really, really close. And one more look and we're going to be there. See how nice and thick that is? So by now your veggies should be pretty much ready, and you'll notice that these aren't quite there. I felt like I had to put a little bit too much pressure on the potatoes to get them to fall apart, and that's when I feel like the potatoes are tender enough for soup. And then just to kind of give it a little bit more of the texture I like, I give the potatoes just a tiny bit of a mash. I don't mash them into oblivion, but just a little bit of help there. And I forgot to mention that the rolls only need 20 minutes to bake at 350 degrees. So I put those in while I was working on the soup, and now they're finished and ready for dinner. And then all you do is add that cream base to the veggies, or some people do it the other way around. But if you feel like you have too much water on your veggies, go ahead and ladle some of it out, but reserve the liquid, because once you add the cream and the veggies together, if you find that it's too thick, you can always add some of that veggie water back in to thin it out. And then it's time to finish it off with some spice. We like ours with quite a bit of black pepper, and then I had already put some salt in with the veggies. And so I did taste for salt and found that it needed some more salt as well. And I rushed these rolls as well. So they would have been so much happier all on one pan, but you know what? Little secret, they still taste delicious. So I'm all about the foolproof breads. So they take time, but they are really good. So here's our spread. Really, the soup and the rolls are the star of the show, and we just had some raw veggies to go with it. So there you have it, potato soup, oatmeal rolls, a giant hug from my mom. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to continue to follow along with Vlogtober. See you tomorrow.